Some people think the richest man in the room is the one with the most money. They never meet the woman who refuses to sell her dignity. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Bellissimo, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants, turning the city lights outside into shimmering streaks of gold and silver. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors, while expensive perfume mingled with the rich scent of truffle, garlic, and aged wine. Everything about this place whispered wealth. Everything except me. My name is Claire Bennett. 27 years old. 5'6". Chubby enough that strangers thought it was acceptable to joke about my body before learning my name. I had learned something years ago. People who laugh at your appearance usually hope you'll forget to notice their character. I adjusted the black apron around my waist and balanced another tray of champagne flutes against my shoulder. 11 hours into my shift, my feet burned inside shoes that had long ago surrendered any promise of comfort. Rent was due in 4 days. My mother's physical therapy bill sat unopened inside my purse. And my younger brother still believed I worked here because I loved serving people. Some lies were kinder than the truth. Claire, my manager called from across the dining room. VIP reservation. Table 1. Every server glanced toward the entrance. Then the room changed. Not louder. Quieter. Conversations slowed. Forks paused halfway to expensive mouths. Even the pianist seemed to hesitate before pressing the next key. 6 men entered wearing tailored black suits that looked as though they had been stitched directly onto their bodies. They didn't search the room with nervous eyes. They owned it with a single glance. The man walking in the center never hurried. He didn't need to. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark hair brushed neatly away from a sharp face that belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine rather than surrounded by men who moved like professional bodyguards. His pale blue eyes swept across the restaurant once, calm and unreadable. Ethan Romano. I recognized him immediately. Not because newspapers printed his photograph. Because everyone in Manhattan knew there were certain names people spoke only after checking who might be listening. His table had already been prepared beside the panoramic windows overlooking Central Park. I picked up the leather-bound menus and forced myself to breathe normally. "Good evening," I said with my practiced smile. "Welcome to Bellissimo." One of the men reached for a menu before Ethan lifted a single finger. The movement was almost lazy. Everyone stopped. He looked at me for exactly 3 seconds. Not my face. Not my body. Just me. It felt strangely different from the countless looks I'd endured my entire life. No judgment. No pity. No amusement. Just observation. "I'll have an espresso," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud. It simply carried the kind of certainty that made other voices unnecessary. "Of course, sir." As I turned toward the kitchen, laughter erupted from the neighboring table. A man wearing a designer watch leaned back in his chair, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "They're lowering hiring standards now?" His wife chuckled. "I guess they needed someone to test the chairs." Heat climbed into my cheeks. Not because I hadn't heard worse. Because cruelty always sounded uglier when wrapped in expensive clothes. I kept walking. 1 step. Then another. Behind me, the laughter continued. Until it suddenly stopped. No raised voice. No argument. Just silence. I glanced over my shoulder. The businessman had gone pale. His smile had disappeared. Ethan Romano hadn't moved from his seat. He hadn't threatened anyone. He hadn't even frowned. He simply looked at the man. Whatever that look meant. It was enough. The restaurant became so quiet I could hear the rain again. Then Ethan slowly turned back toward me. His expression remained unreadable. He rested one hand on the polished oak table before asking a single question. "Miss?" I stopped. "Yes, sir." His pale blue eyes never left mine. "What's one thing nobody can ever buy from you?" His question should have been easy. Instead, it reached a place inside me that money had never been able to touch. The restaurant seemed to disappear. The crystal glasses. The quiet piano. The rain sliding down the enormous windows overlooking Central Park. Even the guests who had returned to whispering moments earlier faded into the background. There was only Ethan Romano. And one simple question. "What's one thing nobody can ever buy from you?" I looked into his pale blue eyes. They weren't challenging me. They weren't mocking me. They were waiting. Most people asked questions because they already wanted a certain answer. Somehow, I knew this man didn't. I placed the silver coffee tray gently on his table before speaking. "The way I see myself." Silence. One heartbeat. 2. 3. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. One of the men beside Ethan slowly lowered the wineglass he had been holding. I wasn't finished. My body changes. My job changes. My bank account changes. I've been called beautiful. I've been called fat. I've been ignored. I've been laughed at. But if I let strangers decide who I am, I forced myself to smile. Then I'd spend the rest of my life renting my self-worth to people who never deserved it. The words came out more quietly than I expected. Almost like a confession. I wasn't trying to impress him. I was simply tired. Tired of pretending insults didn't hurt. Tired of acting as though confidence meant never crying in the shower after another customer made another joke. Confidence wasn't pretending. It was choosing not to surrender. For the first time that evening, something shifted behind Ethan's eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. Like my answer had unlocked a memory he hadn't visited in years. One of his associates leaned toward him. "Boss." Ethan raised one finger. The man fell silent immediately. His attention never left me. "What if someone offered you $10 million, he asked softly, "to become the woman you've always wished you looked like?" The question pierced deeper than the first. My fingers tightened around the coffee pot. For a second, I imagined it. A different face. A different body. Walking into every room without hearing whispers. Buying clothes because I liked them instead of because they hid me. Life would certainly be easier. But easier wasn't always better. I shook my head. I wouldn't. One eyebrow lifted ever so slightly. Why? Because she'd have to live with my memories. The answer surprised even me. I've survived every version of myself. The awkward teenager. The daughter who watched hospital bills destroy her family. The waitress people underestimate. The woman who still smiles after hearing jokes she pretends not to hear. I swallowed. If I erased her, I'd erase the strongest person I've ever known. The rain outside seemed louder now. A fork slipped somewhere across the dining room. No one cared. Every eye had quietly found our table. The businessman who had mocked me earlier looked uncomfortable enough to disappear beneath the white tablecloth. His wife suddenly became fascinated with her dessert. Neither dared look toward Ethan. I finally placed the espresso beside him. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "Your coffee is getting cold." Something almost invisible touched the corner of Ethan Romano's mouth. Not quite a smile. Perhaps the memory of one. He wrapped one hand around the porcelain cup but didn't drink. Instead, he said something so quietly only I could hear. "I've spent 15 years testing loyalty." His eyes remained fixed on mine. "You're the first person who's ever answered with freedom." And somehow, that frightened him more than any enemy ever could. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who threaten you. They're the ones who quietly decide you're worth remembering. I stood frozen for a moment after Ethan Romano spoke. You're the first person who's ever answered with freedom. The words lingered in the air long after I stepped away from his table. Freedom. No customer had ever used that word to describe me. Most saw a waitress. Some saw a woman who should lose weight. A few saw someone invisible enough to ignore completely. Freedom had never crossed anyone's mind. I returned to the service station and forced myself back into routine. Table 6 needed another bottle of wine. Table 9 wanted extra Parmesan. Someone complained the steak wasn't warm enough. Life continued exactly as it always had. Except, every few minutes I caught Ethan looking in my direction. Not constantly. Not obviously. Just enough to make me wonder why. He wasn't studying my appearance anymore. It felt as though he were trying to solve a puzzle. Across the room, his associates discussed business in voices too low for anyone else to hear. Occasionally folders appeared on the table. One man slid a document toward Ethan. He barely glanced at it. Instead, he signed without reading more than a single page. Power looked strangely ordinary in his hands. No dramatic speeches. No expensive displays. Just decisions that seemed capable of changing other people's lives with a single signature. Meanwhile, I was debating whether I could afford fresh groceries before payday. The contrast almost made me laugh. Near the end of dinner, the businessman who had mocked me earlier stood to leave. He hesitated beside Ethan's table. Mr. Romano. His voice carried none of the confidence it had worn 20 minutes before. I'd like to apologize if my comments disturbed your evening. Ethan slowly looked up from his espresso. You weren't speaking to me. No, but... You were speaking to someone working. Yes. Someone who couldn't answer you without risking her job. The businessman swallowed. I understand. No. Ethan's voice remained perfectly calm. You understand now because someone stronger happened to be watching. The man's face lost what little color remained. I meant no harm. Ethan leaned back slightly. That's the interesting thing about harm. He folded his hands. It doesn't require permission. No threats followed. No raised voice. No dramatic warning. Yet the businessman apologized to me before leaving the restaurant. Actually apologized. Not because he had suddenly become kind. Because consequences had finally found him. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me appreciated it. Another part wondered why justice so often depended on who happened to be standing nearby. As Ethan's table prepared to leave, I carried over the final receipt. He signed it with quick, precise strokes. No hesitation. No unnecessary conversation. Then he closed the leather folder and handed it back to me. Thank you for tonight, Miss Bennett. My heart skipped. I had never told him my last name. I stared at the receipt. The tip wasn't outrageous. It wasn't the kind of money meant to impress. 25%. Respectful. Ordinary. Intentional. But tucked neatly beneath the signed receipt was a white business card. No company logo. No address. Only one name. Ethan Romano. And a handwritten sentence. Never let the world negotiate your value. I looked up. He was already walking toward the exit. His bodyguards followed without speaking. The heavy glass doors opened. Cold rain drifted briefly into the restaurant. Then they disappeared into the Manhattan night. I slipped the card into my apron pocket, unaware that somewhere across the street, inside a black SUV waiting beneath the rain, Ethan Romano was giving an order that would quietly change both of our lives. Find out everything about Claire Bennett. His head of security frowned. You think she's connected to someone? Ethan looked back once through the restaurant window. No. A long silence followed. I think she's real. And somehow, that made her more dangerous than anyone he'd ever investigated. People reveal who they are when they think no one is watching. The truly remarkable ones reveal who they are even when someone powerful is. The next morning began like every other. At least, that's what I believed. The subway was crowded. Someone spilled coffee near the doors. A little girl smiled at me for no reason before her mother hurried her away. New York never slowed down long enough to notice a single waitress. I preferred it that way. By 8:30, Bellissimo buzzed with its usual rhythm. Silverware clinked. Fresh bread came out of the ovens. The kitchen shouted orders in 3 different languages. Chef Marco barked at everyone equally. Normal. Comfortingly normal. Until my manager called me into his office. Claire. His expression was unreadable. For one terrifying second, I thought I had been fired. He closed the door behind me. I received a phone call this morning. My stomach tightened. A complaint? No. He looked down at a sheet of paper. It was unusual. I waited. They asked about your schedule. My heartbeat stumbled. Who? They wouldn't say. Every possibility rushed through my mind. A debt collector. The hospital. My landlord. Then another possibility quietly appeared. Ethan Romano. I immediately pushed the thought away. Why would someone like him care where a waitress spent her afternoons? It made no sense. You didn't tell them anything, did you? My manager looked almost offended. Of course not. Relief washed over me. They offered a donation to the restaurant's employee assistance fund. How much? He hesitated. Enough to replace every piece of kitchen equipment. I stared at him. They said it wasn't payment. It was appreciation. For what? He looked directly at me. They said one of our employees reminded someone important that integrity still exists. Neither of us spoke. Because neither of us really understood what that meant. The rest of the morning refused to stay ordinary. A florist delivered white lilies. Not for a customer. For one of our elderly dishwashers whose wife had recently passed away. The delivery card contained no signature. An hour later, the refrigerator technician arrived. He announced that the restaurant's broken cooling system had already been paid for. Again. No name. By lunchtime, Chef Marco frowned. This is getting strange. I silently agreed. Late that afternoon, my shift finally ended. Instead of taking the subway home, I stopped by St. Catherine's Rehabilitation Center to visit my mother. The building smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She was sitting beside the window, knitting something that looked suspiciously like another scarf I didn't need. You look tired, she said. I work in a restaurant. You look different. Mothers noticed everything. I sat beside her. Did you ever meet someone who made one conversation feel important? She smiled knowingly. Did he ask for your phone number? I laughed. No. Worse. He asked me a question. And? I answered. She waited. That's all. No. She reached over and squeezed my hand. If you're still thinking about it today. It wasn't just a question. Before I could answer, a nurse entered carrying a clipboard. Mrs. Bennett? Yes? I have wonderful news. Both of us looked up. The foundation covering your next 6 months of physical therapy has already processed payment. I blinked. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. The nurse smiled warmly. The donor requested complete anonymity. My mother covered her mouth. I felt my pulse racing. Anonymous. Again. As the nurse walked away, I noticed a familiar white business card resting beneath the paperwork. No logo. No address. Just one handwritten sentence. Kindness should never announce itself. There was still no signature. There didn't need to be. For the first time since meeting Ethan Romano, I wasn't wondering who he was. I was wondering why a man powerful enough to frighten half the city seemed determined to help people without ever letting them know he had been there. And somewhere across Manhattan, inside the top floor of a glass tower no company officially owned, Ethan listened as his head of security finished the report. Claire Bennett has no criminal record. No hidden assets. No political connections. No lies we can find. Ethan remained silent. His advisor finally asked the question everyone else was thinking. So what makes her different? Ethan looked out across the skyline. She answered the one question that I realized I've never been able to answer myself. The hardest choice isn't between right and wrong. It's between what built your life, and what might finally change it. I didn't see Ethan Romano again for nearly a week. At first, I told myself that was normal. Men like him didn't return to places because of conversations. They returned because of business. Still. Every evening, I caught myself glancing toward the restaurant entrance whenever the heavy glass doors opened. Every time, it was someone else. A businessman. A family celebrating an anniversary. Tourists trying to look wealthier than they were. Never Ethan. Eventually, life demanded my attention again. Mom's therapy continued. Bills kept arriving with perfect punctuality. And Bellissimo remained as busy as ever. Then Thursday happened. It started with an envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just my name written in neat black ink. Claire Bennett. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a property survey. Maps. Photographs. Legal documents. The neighborhood where my apartment stood had been outlined with thick red lines. Every building. Every business. Every home. Across the top, one sentence was printed in bold. Riverside Redevelopment Project. I frowned. None of it made sense. Until Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly woman who owned the bakery next door to my apartment, called me that evening. They're buying everyone out. What? They offered us 30 days. Her voice trembled. They want the whole neighborhood. I walked outside immediately. For the first time, I noticed surveyors placing bright orange markers along the sidewalks. Construction crews photographed buildings. Men in expensive suits knocked on doors carrying leather briefcases. By sunset, 3 families had already accepted offers. Money changed hands faster than memories. Mrs. Alvarez wiped away tears as she stood outside the bakery she and her husband had opened 42 years earlier. They can't buy history, she whispered. I wanted to believe that. The next morning, 2 men arrived at Bellissimo asking for me. Gray suits. Perfect smiles. Corporate badges. Miss Bennett? Yes. We represent Harbor Development Group. I think you have the wrong person. We don't. One of them slid a folder across the table. We understand your apartment building is among the remaining properties. I'm just a tenant. You also happen to be someone the community listens to. I almost laughed. No one listens to waitresses. We've heard otherwise. He smiled politely. We'd appreciate your encouragement. Inside the folder was a generous relocation package. Enough money to rent somewhere nicer. Enough to pay my mother's remaining medical bills. Enough to erase years of financial stress. My hands froze. For one impossible moment, I imagined saying yes. No more choosing between groceries and prescriptions. No more overtime. No more fear every time the mailbox filled with envelopes. The first man leaned forward. We believe everyone has a price. Without thinking, I closed the folder. You believe wrong. His smile faded. You should reconsider. No. This neighborhood isn't just buildings. It's birthdays. It's neighbors carrying groceries upstairs. It's children growing into adults. You can't calculate that on a spreadsheet. The men stood. You may regret this. Maybe. I handed back the folder. But at least the regret would belong to me. They walked away without another word. That evening, across the city, inside a private conference room overlooking Manhattan, Ethan Romano stared at the same redevelopment map lying across a polished black table. Dozens of executives waited silently. One finally cleared his throat. Mr. Romano. The remaining properties are creating delays. Another executive added carefully, if necessary, we can increase pressure. The room became still. Ethan's eyes settled on one address highlighted in red. Claire Bennett's neighborhood. He spoke only 4 words. Who approved this acquisition? No one answered. Because everyone already knew. The company belonged to Harbor Development. Harbor Development belonged to another corporation. And hidden behind 3 layers of shell companies. Every final decision still belonged to one man. Ethan Romano. For the first time in years, the empire he had built with perfect calculation was standing directly across from the one woman who had reminded him that some things were never meant to be bought. And suddenly, winning no longer felt like victory at all. Power can force people to kneel. Respect is the only thing that makes them stand beside you. The rain returned that night. Not the gentle drizzle from the evening I first met Ethan. This rain came with heavy clouds that swallowed the skyline, washing Manhattan in shades of gray. I left Bellissimo later than usual. The neighborhood looked different now. Bright orange notices hung from storefront windows. For acquisition review. Temporary relocation available. Every sign felt like another crack spreading through a place I had called home for years. Mrs. Alvarez stood outside her bakery, watching workers measure the sidewalk. They came back, she whispered. They doubled the offer. Did you accept? She slowly shook her head. My husband built this place with his own hands. She smiled sadly. I can replace bricks. I can't replace memories. Before I could answer, 3 black SUVs rolled quietly onto the street. Not police. Not construction. Something else. The engines stopped. The doors opened in perfect sequence. Men in dark suits stepped out first. Then Ethan Romano. He wasn't wearing the expensive overcoat I'd seen at the restaurant. Tonight he looked simpler. Dark charcoal suit. No tie. His hands rested calmly inside his pockets as he looked around the neighborhood. The construction supervisors immediately straightened. One hurried toward him. Mr. Romano, we weren't expecting. Ethan raised a hand. The man stopped speaking. Completely. I watched from across the sidewalk, my heart pounding. He hadn't noticed me yet. Or maybe he had. He slowly walked past the bakery. Past the old bookstore. Past children drawing chalk flowers on cracked pavement. He wasn't looking at buildings. He was looking at lives. Finally his eyes found mine. Neither of us spoke. He crossed the street alone. No bodyguards followed. That surprised me more than anything. I didn't know this was your neighborhood, he said quietly. I folded my arms. I didn't know you owned the company trying to erase it. The silence between us became almost painful. He didn't deny it. That told me everything. So it's true. Yes. One honest word. No excuses. No clever explanation. Just truth. I looked away before anger could become tears. I thought you were different. I wanted to be. The answer caught me off guard. I laughed bitterly. You call this different? I pointed toward the survey markers. The anonymous donations. The flowers. My mother's therapy. Were those supposed to make this easier? His jaw tightened. They weren't payment. What were they? They were never connected to this project. They are now. For the first time since we'd met, Ethan had no immediate reply. Because there wasn't one. You once asked what nobody could buy from me, I said softly. You remember? I remember every word. I nodded toward the neighborhood. Well. This is what you still don't understand. He waited. You think refusing money is the difficult part. It isn't. The difficult part is refusing money from someone you hoped was becoming a better man. His expression changed. Not anger. Pain. Real pain. It flashed across his face so briefly that anyone else might have missed it. I never wanted to hurt you. I believe that. I surprised both of us by saying it. But intentions don't protect people. Choices do. Behind us, a little boy kicked a soccer ball across the sidewalk. It rolled toward Ethan's polished shoes. Without hesitation, he bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a small smile. The child thanked him and ran away. No fear. No idea who he was. Ethan watched the boy disappear before speaking again. If I stop this project, what happens to everything built around it? I don't know. And if I don't? He looked directly into my eyes. I lose something I can't buy back. Neither of us moved. The city continued around us. Car horns. Rain. Distant sirens. Life. Then one of Ethan's advisors hurried across the street. His voice was low, but urgent. Boss. We have a problem. The board has already approved the demolition schedule. He handed Ethan a tablet. The first buildings come down Monday morning. Ethan stared at the screen. Then at me. For the first time in years. The man who controlled an empire looked like someone who had run out of easy answers. The strongest apology isn't spoken. It's proven by the first sacrifice that actually costs something. Monday arrived wrapped in silence. No bulldozers. No construction crews. No orange barricades. The entire neighborhood woke expecting destruction. Instead, nothing happened. People stepped outside their homes with cautious hope. Mrs. Alvarez unlocked her bakery doors as if she expected someone to stop her. No one did. Children walked to school. The bookstore opened. The flower shop placed fresh roses outside. It felt almost unreal. By noon, every news station in Manhattan carried the same headline. Harbor Development suspends multi-billion-dollar project. No explanation. No interviews. No official statement. Only one sentence. The redevelopment plan is under executive review. I knew exactly who had ordered it. But I also knew it couldn't have been easy. That evening, I finished my shift and walked toward the subway. A familiar black sedan waited quietly across the street. No flashing lights. No convoy. Just one car. The rear window lowered. Miss Bennett. Ethan. I hesitated. I'd like to talk. I don't think that's a good idea. I know. His answer surprised me. But I owe you honesty. For several long seconds, I stood motionless. Every sensible instinct told me to walk away. Instead, I opened the passenger door. The car wasn't luxurious in the way I expected. No champagne. No extravagant displays. Just dark leather seats and the faint scent of cedarwood. The driver silently closed the divider, giving us privacy. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I stopped the project. I know. It cost me. I know that too. He gave a quiet laugh without humor. You seem to know everything. No. I looked out the window. I just know people don't freeze a project worth billions because they feel generous. He nodded once. The board thinks I've lost perspective. Have you? I hope so. I turned toward him. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Morally. As though something inside him had been arguing for days without rest. They've spent 15 years trusting my decisions. He stared through the rain-covered window. This is the first one they believe was made for someone else. Were they wrong? His answer came almost immediately. No. Silence settled again. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a thick folder on the seat between us. I want you to see something. I didn't touch it. What is it? Every property purchase. Every shell company. Every signature. My signature. I slowly opened the folder. Dozens of documents. Every layer of ownership carefully hidden. Until the final page. Ethan Romano. Chairman. Chief Executive. The last approval. I closed the folder gently. You didn't have to show me this. Yes. I did. Why? Because if you only see the man trying to fix the damage, you'll never understand the man who caused it. His honesty hurt more than any excuse could have. You know what surprises me? He looked at me. I expected someone with your power to defend himself. I spent years doing exactly that. What changed? He smiled faintly. A waitress. Despite everything. I almost smiled back. Almost. Ethan. This isn't about me forgiving you. I know. It's about whether you forgive yourself after making the right choice. His expression grew thoughtful. I don't know how. I didn't think so. I opened the car door. Before stepping out, I looked back one last time. If you really want to change, stop trying to impress me. His eyes met mine. Then what should I do? I thought about my mother's hands. Mrs. Alvarez's bakery. The frightened families who still didn't know whether they would have homes next month. Be the kind of man who would do the right thing even if I had never walked into your restaurant. I stepped into the rain and closed the door. The sedan remained parked long after I disappeared into the subway entrance. Inside, Ethan didn't tell the driver to leave. He simply stared at the empty seat beside him. For the first time in his life, no one had asked him to prove his power. Someone had asked him to deserve it. And somehow, that was the one challenge no empire could solve for him. Real change isn't measured by the enemies you defeat. It's measured by the people who no longer need you to save them. 3 months passed. The neighborhood still stood. Not because one powerful man had protected it. Because hundreds of ordinary people had refused to surrender it. Local newspapers called it a miracle. Lawyers called it a legal stalemate. The families who lived there called it another chance. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Mrs. Alvarez's bakery filled every morning with the smell of fresh cinnamon bread. Children still played soccer in the narrow street behind the bookstore. My mother finished another month of therapy and, for the first time in years, walked without reaching for my arm every few steps. Hope had become quietly ordinary. And somehow, that felt extraordinary. I hadn't seen Ethan in weeks. Occasionally his name appeared in financial headlines. Romano Group announces leadership restructuring. Executives resign after internal review. Charitable foundation expands citywide. The articles never mentioned why. They never mentioned one waitress. That was exactly how it should be. One Friday evening, Bellissimo became unusually busy. Every table was reserved. The dining room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Around 7 o'clock, Chef Marco stormed out of the kitchen. "Claire. We've got a problem. Our dessert supplier cancelled. We'll figure it out." Before he could answer, the front doors burst open. Not dramatically. Desperately. A young woman rushed inside carrying a little boy no older than 8. He clutched his stomach, crying in pain. "Please. Someone call an ambulance." The entire restaurant froze. Some guests stood. Others simply watched. Without thinking, I hurried toward them. "It's okay. You're safe." The boy's face had turned pale. His breathing came in quick, frightened bursts. I knelt beside him. "What's your name?" "Liam." "Hi, Liam. I'm Claire. We're going to take this one breath at a time." The mother looked terrified. "He has a medical condition. He collapsed outside." I reached for my phone. Before I could dial, another voice calmly spoke behind me. "The ambulance is already coming." I looked up. Ethan. No bodyguards. No expensive suit. Just a navy sweater beneath a simple dark coat. He had been sitting quietly in a corner booth the entire time. No one had even noticed him. He crouched beside us. Not beside me. Beside Liam. "Hey, buddy. You like baseball?" The little boy blinked through tears. "The Yankees." Ethan smiled. "They're having a better season than I am." Liam actually laughed. Just a little. Enough. The tension eased. Within minutes, paramedics rushed through the doors. They carefully lifted Liam onto a stretcher. His mother turned toward us with tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you." I smiled. "You already did. You trusted strangers." After the ambulance left, the restaurant slowly returned to life. Guests resumed eating. Conversations cautiously restarted. Only then did I realize Ethan was still standing beside me. "You never told anyone who you were." He shrugged. "They didn't need to know." "No." I smiled softly. "They didn't." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something different. His phone vibrated repeatedly. He silenced it without looking. Again. And again. Finally I asked, "Important?" "It used to be." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "What is now?" He looked around the restaurant. A mother hugging her frightened son before climbing into the ambulance. Chef Marco bringing hot tea to the shaken woman without charging her. Customers quietly covering the family's dinner bill before leaving. Small acts. Invisible acts. Acts no newspaper would ever report. This, Ethan answered. People choosing kindness when nobody's keeping score. Before I could reply, the restaurant doors opened once more. This time, 3 men in expensive suits entered. They weren't customers. Their expressions were too cold. One walked directly toward Ethan. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Ethan's face became unreadable. "This isn't the place." The man lowered his voice. "The board voted. They've accepted an outside partnership. They're moving forward. He hesitated before finishing. Whether you approve it or not. For the first time since I met him, I saw something I never thought possible. The man who once controlled everything had just lost control of his own empire. A single question brought us together. A single answer taught us that love was never about changing someone, it was about becoming someone worth standing beside. 1 year later. The rain came back. Soft. Steady. Almost familiar. I unlocked the front door of my own restaurant before sunrise. The wooden sign above the entrance read, Second Chance Cafe. Nothing about it was extravagant. The tables didn't match perfectly. The walls were decorated with photographs donated by neighbors. Mrs. Alvarez supplied every loaf of bread. Chef Marco insisted on helping design the menu. Even the bookstore owner had built the shelves by hand. It wasn't a business created by money. It was built by people who refused to let their community disappear. Every morning, when I turned the sign from closed to open, I remembered the girl who once believed surviving was enough. Now, I was finally living. Mom managed the front counter 3 days a week. She smiled more than she had in years. My younger brother had started college. The neighborhood still stood. Not unchanged, but unbroken. Around noon, the lunch crowd filled nearly every seat. Someone laughed near the windows. Coffee steamed from fresh mugs. The scent of cinnamon and roasted espresso drifted through the room. It felt wonderfully ordinary. The little bell above the entrance chimed. I looked up. A tall man stepped inside wearing a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Dark jeans. Simple leather shoes. No bodyguards. No convoy. No expensive watch. Just Ethan. Some of the regular customers recognized him. No one rushed toward him. No one seemed afraid. He had spent the past year earning something that couldn't be demanded. Trust. He smiled when he saw me. Table for one? I couldn't help smiling back. I think we can manage that. He chose the same seat beside the window where rain painted silver lines across the glass. I carried over a cup of black coffee before he even ordered. You remembered. You never changed your coffee. He looked around the cafe. Children doing homework. An elderly couple sharing pie. Neighbors greeting each other by name. It turned out exactly the way you imagined. I shook my head. No. It turned out better. He nodded slowly. I resigned. I heard. The board? They kept the company. And you? I kept myself. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. Some victories arrived quietly. He reached into his jacket pocket. My heart skipped when he placed an old white business card on the table. The same kind he had once slipped beneath a restaurant receipt. Only this time. It was blank. No handwritten message. No advice. Nothing. I looked at him curiously. Aren't you going to write something? He smiled. I already did. When? The day I stopped trying to buy respect. He gently slid the blank card toward me. I don't need reminders anymore. I finally know my answer. I thought back to that rainy night at Bellissimo. To the question that had changed both our lives. What's one thing nobody can ever buy from you? I looked into his eyes. They were still calm. Still steady. But no longer empty. You found it. I did. What was it? He reached across the table and took my hand, not to possess it, not to rescue me, but simply to hold it. The man I chose to become. Outside, the rain continued to fall across Manhattan. Inside, the cafe buzzed with ordinary conversations that somehow felt extraordinary. I realized then that Ethan Romano had never needed someone to save him from his enemies. He had needed someone brave enough to tell him the truth. And I had never needed a powerful man to change my life. I only needed one who was willing to change his own. Some people spend their lives searching for someone who can give them everything. We discovered something far rarer. The right person never buys your worth. They remind you to keep it. And sometimes, the most powerful answer in the world begins with a question no money can ever silence.